All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's time for us to get the conversation on the road. I did say before the break that we will be looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the nation's economy and perhaps the global economy, because it's not just Nigeria that is taking a beating right now. All prices trading around $25 today. Ayodeji, who is the Managing Director at AFRINVEST Securities, is joining me from Lagos. Mr. Ebo, good to know that you're joining me virtually. I think this is just the best thing we'll be doing now. I know we do Skype, but as this thing continues to spread, we may just begin to have less and less personal contact. Welcome to the program. Good to see you. It's been a while. Can you hear me, Mr. Ebo?
Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's been a while. Where have you been? I hope you're safe.
Yes, we're trying to keep safe and to keep with the instructions.
Yes. As a company, what are you guys doing? Of course, you oversee people, you supervise people as the Managing Director of AFRINVEST Securities. What are some of the plans that you've put in place, or some of the preventive measures that you've put in place in your office?
Yes, I think the first thing that we try to first put in place to ensure that everyone that comes in, including staff, we try every day or every moment once you step out of the compound and come in to check your temperature, as well as also sanitize your hands. That is to at least to prevent the COVID-19, at least to check and to be sure that everyone is fine, so that if there's any symptom that can be nipped in the bud immediately. We've also tried to restrict in terms of having physical meetings. On Friday, we had like a test run. All the staff worked from home, and which is for us to reassess the position. Perhaps we get to a situation where the government is restricting movements. How can our business run? So we did like a business continuity plan, trying to test run how it will work if we are able to access the office. So from our end, we are doing our bit, and would also ensure, we're also trying to see how we ensure that we limit number of staff that even come to work as much as possible. Most people would be working from home to reduce as much as possible, to adhere with the instructions, and also to break that chain in terms of how it can spread, because this is a very peculiar virus, I'll call it that, and even for those that are also carrying it may not even be aware. You will be aware in terms of even our commercial buses, in terms of transportation to the office. It's keeping that social distance and or keeping that distance is not applicable when you check in terms of how the economy is structured. You have more than 100 million people trying to feed for themselves on a daily basis. For these guys, they would also on a daily basis try to see how they can come to work and for them to be able to feed for themselves. So having a shutdown would be something that would be very dear to the economy.
Now, okay, let me take you up from there. From your last statement, do you think that having a national lockdown for the country is something we can afford? Just like other nations are doing. UAE, for example, is doing that. Europe is doing that. Even the United States, there are some countries that have told their citizens, don't worry, we'll supply you food and medicine and whatever supply you need. Do you think that as we record cases that we may afford a lockdown? Are you there?
I think we're hoping it will not get to that state where we'll have a lockdown, because when you look at how the Nigerian economy is structured, the informal sector constitutes for a significant part of our GDP. For most of them is based on, they earn their revenue based on daily trades, and they have to get to their market, sell things, buy and sell things before they can feed. So a lockdown would have more significant impact on us in Nigeria, because you also just put in, for example, the construction company that is unable to, when the workers are unable to go to work, there are people that sell food to them. That means they won't be able to come, they won't be able to sell, they won't be able to earn income. And even for the demand, so if for all those that are supplying the artisans, those that are doing the casual work and they are supplying them, even with, we will go as basic as feeding alone, then that means that demand will reduce significantly. And as a result, the demand for those that are even selling wholesale would also reduce. So it's really going to have a very significant negative impact on our economy if we have to lock down because of how our own economy is structured. People live on daily income, and if they don't work, they are unable to earn. You can't compare us to some of the developed world countries that even for some of them are offering to even pay salaries for their staff, for employees, to reduce the level of unemployment. Like in the UK, they are offering to pay about 80% of the salary for those that are already on payroll. We don't have this kind of setup in Nigeria. And for the masses, for the average guy on the street, for them, they need to work and they spend on a daily basis, and they need to earn money for them to be able to survive. But we're hoping it won't get to that. But life first, life is critical. If it has to get to that, then everybody has to endure the pain for the period as much as possible. But in terms of the impact on our economy, the impact on GDP would be very, very significant because yes, we are aware of some of the palliatives that the CBN is putting in place. But when you look at the structure of our economy, the informal sector still accounts for a significant part of our economy that drives this. So they don't have the data to that captures these guys. How are they able to also, in terms of provide palliatives for them or incentives for them to be able to stay afloat? These are some of the questions or challenges that may come up if we eventually, if we, the economy or the state or the country as a whole is on lockdown.
Now, of course, there will be dire consequences moving ahead. And I like the fact that you said, of course, it's human life first. Like I said earlier, it's not even about economy we're talking now or the economic crisis imminent. It's about saving lives. It's about human. It's a health crisis right now. It's three-pronged. You have health authorities or health crisis. You have the fiscal policy, and you have the monetary on one side. Are there other measures that the government can take right now? Other measures apart from the ones they have taken? Are there other measures that can avert a national lockdown even as cases just this morning are increasing, as Nigeria has recorded a first death? Are there other measures that government can really take that perhaps government is not thinking about now?
I think first of all, it all starts with us. So for the individual, from our own little corner, we need to first adhere in terms of our hygiene. We need to first adhere in terms of keeping distance, because this virus, you can't even know, for those that are carrying it, they may not even exhibit that symptom. And if we avoid meetings, avoid parties, avoid gatherings that has that potential of transmitting this virus, then would be able to limit it to a very large extent. Government can only provide direct, and we're also to adhere with the directive. Some of the things that we would expect that government should also do is, what we are seeing in some other countries is, can they provide sanitizers to the informal sector? How can they provide shared sanitizers to them? Can the corporate bodies, as a form of corporate social responsibility, purchase sanitizer in bulk and share to all these people, the artisans, for most of those people that are not, that really move on the street, or they are in the lower cadre or in terms of the ladder. So that would help in largely. Then also, is government also making arrangements? Currently, when you look at the the hospitals that have been set up for this kind of infection, we don't feel that we have that scale that can be able to even handle. We've seen the geometric progression that we've been seeing in terms of the numbers, which we don't feel that we have that that ability or that capability for us to be able to handle it if it goes into full-blown crisis. So for governments and even for the private sector guys, this is the time for them to say how they want to wrap up in terms of their CSR, providing sanitizers, also trying to see as much as possible education. Awareness is very critical, but we need to begin to drive the awareness to the grassroots, because it's going to be it's unimaginable what would happen if it gets into the rural area. So for us to prevent that ahead, we need to see how we want to get some of those publicity, those awareness in their language. Also gathering having like a town hall. I know we may not have a town hall meeting,
yes.
but looking at their major, they are ahead, speaking with them. This is the era of where you have said communication. You can send them messages for them to disseminate that information to them at the grassroots, so that they can. It's easier that we're hearing it in Lagos, in Abuja, to be able to identify for some of them. But once it goes into that rural area, for some of them, they may not even come out. They may not, in terms of their belief, in terms of their culture, going to the hospital. You may not be able to tame it at that level.
I like what you said, that businesses can be a lot more responsible right now in terms of CSR, because there's little government can do now. Government do not even have those resources right now, like marketplaces or where people gather. You've just said it there, that we operate largely an informal economy. So telling the whole economy to be on a lockdown, that means the government must be ready. Government across board now, including states, must be ready to feed all of us. If they are saying lockdown for 14 days, they will be ready to feed all of us, which they can't afford to do. So perhaps businesses should step up now in terms of CSR, providing some things they need to provide, and even support to the NCDC.
Yes, it is critical, and that cannot be overemphasized. The private sector, we know that in terms of contribution to GDP, the government still accounts for less than 10%. So it's private consumption. So the private sector, the banks, most of the large corporates, this is the time for them, because even their staff is also at risk, especially looking at the banks, customers coming in. How would they, for customers coming in, the staff would also be at risk. So it's the earlier we're able to tame this virus as much as possible, the better for all of us.
You just talked about the banks. Just over the weekend, and even before I came into the studio, I got some correspondences from banks saying that, advising their customers when they come into the banks, they will have contactless thermometers, checking their temperatures, hand sanitizers. I try as much as possible to be brisk about their businesses, social distancing, and all of that. So those are some of the measures that businesses like banks are already taking to avoid or mitigate the spread of coronavirus. Now, let's quickly move ahead to even some other issues, even around this coronavirus. We saw the intervention from the central bank last week. In just the space of 1 week, Godwin Emefiele, the CBN governor, spoke to some of us here in Abuja in terms of the response measures that the Monetary Authority is taking. Talk to me about your sentiments, because we saw the CBN just coming out first before even any other person. So we saw response from the health authorities, then Monetary Authority. What are your sentiments about the different measures put by the central bank before we go to the Bankers Committee on Saturday? That was held on Saturday.
Overall, it's positive, at least to come up with initiatives to see a need to even intervene even in the first place. But when you also do we dissect for some of the interventions, so reducing the loan from 9% to 5%, that's the agri loan from 9% to 5%. That means it only applies for the few ones that have been able to enjoy that. when you look at the number of farmers, I can't recall the number of farmers that might have been able to access this. It's still very small relative to what you would, what in terms of the contribution to agri. So what will other farmers, how will they be able to survive? We know there have been a lot of crowdfunding that agri space has been doing in terms of mobilizing funds. For those guys, in terms of how would they survive? So in terms of reducing the providing moratorium, reducing the interest rate from 9 to 5%, will only impact, the impact will be minimal. But in terms of looking at it in the books of the banks, yes, there may be reduction in terms of interest rate for a year, but this affects only a very small proportion of Nigerians. You also want to look at in terms of provision of funds for the health sector. Yes, it's good to provide funding, but you know that some of these things, you cannot expect a change overnight. Even for some of them in preparing their strategy for 2020, expansion may not even be on the table for them. Now the fund is available before you also come up with a business strategy, review their policy. Also, do they have very idle capacity that they can expand their production? So setting up a plant will also take a lot of time before they can get new plant to expand their capacity. So it's good that the fund is available, but in terms of the immediate impact that we may see, we don't expect to see any immediate impact from even that. Yes, for the banks, in terms of the forbearance, restructuring of loans, yes, that may help in the interim if this doesn't persist for a longer period, to help check in terms of recognition of non-performing loans as much as possible. But we know that especially loans within the oil and gas sector, manufacturing sector, the trade sector will really be exposed now. So restructuring, yes, makes a lot of sense so that in terms of the servicing of those loans, it can be sustained as much as possible. But overall, it's a welcome development. But when you look at in terms of the impact that you may get from some of these interventions, will be applicable to those that are within the formal sector, will be applicable to the few ones that have accessed loans, which, like we rightly acknowledge, and that our economy is as more informal sector, is driven by the informal sector. So what are those policies that are being put in place to support the SMEs, to support them? What do we have? Do we even have a structure? Do we have most of the SMEs? How many of them are registered? Do we have a structure for them to begin to access funds? So that, for instance, someone was discussing with me this morning that has a gym, saying if he's even able to survive and can pay for, he has shut down the gym because of the COVID-19. So if he's able to survive the month of March and pay salaries to the staff, then in April, and if there's no business, nobody coming to the gym, how will they survive? So it means that in terms of unemployment will rise sporadically. That's really very alarming. And you know, there's a link between unemployment and insecurity. Once you begin to see that, it's really, the impact is unimaginable.
Now, let's move over to the Bankers Committee. The meeting was held on Saturday. At the briefing on, was it on Thursday last week, the governor did tell some of us that the CBN and the Bankers Committee will meet in Lagos at 10 a.m. That's last Saturday, and they met. And let's take a look at one of the measures that came out, an activation of the 1.5 trillion naira infraco project for building critical infrastructure. This was one of the recommendations at the CBN consultative roundtable that was held just less than 2 weeks ago, where we saw Godwin Emefiele and the titans of the industry, banking industry, as well as the economy come together, Aliko Dangote, Jimovia, and all of that. I was at that consultative forum later that evening. This was one of the recommendations. How do you see this recommendation in terms of activating 1.5 trillion naira infraco project for building critical infrastructure? What does it say about the essentiality and the importance of preparation and attention to infrastructure, especially right now that we're in a crisis mode?
Yes, I think it's really a very positive one. If you recall, the budget has been reviewed and capital expenditure has been cut down by 20%. Though we were also skeptical with a budget size of about 10 trillion and projected revenue about 8 trillion, while we know that budget based on budget performance, actual revenue, our projection was actually about 4.6 trillion, which leaves almost a deficit of about 5 trillion. Yes, we know through ways and means they've been funding through the CBN to support, but in terms of how this would pan out, governments should know that they don't have that resources to, even if they borrow an additional 2 trillion to fund infrastructure, they need to sit down and come up with a structure. So that's a build, operate, and transfer structure for most of this infrastructure. It will continue to delay before we begin to receive significant impact in terms of our growth rate or in terms of easing business in Nigeria. So for instance, the Lagos-Ibadan Railway, for me, for us, we don't believe that why should government be trying to fund the Lagos-Ibadan Railway. They can give it, they can sign a contract for someone to build, operate it, and they transfer it after some years. It will fast track in terms of how we will begin to implement in terms of our infrastructure. We can see Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, this is going to over 10 years because of funding. So they need to get people that have the capability, people that can access the funding. And I feel that even the populace will be happy to pay when they see roads that are smooth, when they see railway that will reduce the time it takes them to access, and especially movement of goods across the nation. If they're Lagos to Kano, Lagos to Calabar, they can outsource that, get someone to build. And they should also ensure, because part of what is also scaring away foreign investors is the enforcement of contract. The new government can come and pull the trigger, not minding the impact that it may have, the long-term impact it may have in terms of perception. So if we are able to take care and we're able to assure them that if I'm giving you 20-year contract to handle this, even if a new government comes in, your contract cannot be cancelled. So even if we have to make signing of PPP contract more rigorous and putting in laws in place, we feel that we will attract more foreign direct investment, which is what we need. Ghana, which is about 20 or 30% of our population, is attracting significant foreign direct investment than what we are attracting in Nigeria. Last year, we attracted just less than $500 million compared to a high of about $8 billion that we get annually. That is part of the reason why our growth rate has continued to be very fragile. If we don't do anything regarding that to fast track, if government wants to continue to see how they want to be, they want to build the roads, fix the rail, fix power transmission company, then it's going to slow us down. And in terms of our expectation, it's really going to be very, very, very weak in terms of our expectation.
Okay, Ayo, let's just stick a bit with one question on this infrastructure. How should we draw the line between the provision of which one is social infrastructure and which one is commercial? Because for Nigerians, we do have the culture not to pay for certain things. For example, power, which you mentioned, we transited from NEPA to PHC, and that in fact, even if they take light or they bring back power right now, you see people say, shout up NEPA. So people still believe that provision of power, electricity is a social contract. So where do we draw the line between social infrastructure and commercial infrastructure, which you're talking now that perhaps private sector should come in and take over?
I know there should be, but we should be able to distinguish between that. So in terms of when you also, government want to focus on, especially even the state government, roads within the rural areas. Government can use its own funds as counterpart funding. So for instance, I spoke about the railway. If they need to contribute 10 or 20% for them, they can use that money. So you look at the multiplier effect of the 1 trillion that they are trying to raise. If they use that and use it as as contribution of 10-20%. They can use that to access about another 10 trillion, which will help. So, but in terms of for the rural areas, in terms of the belief, so stakeholders engagement is also very critical. We've seen in terms of communities that have allowed regarding power, renewable power. There's this village, Bamu village in Ogun State. They are totally on renewable solar. So it's based on the belief of the local guys that they believe that they need to pay. So in terms of business-wise, they picked up. People are migrating more into that community. They used other 5 or 6 other communities as a case study, but that was the only success that they were able to record. For some of them, did not believe that they should pay, like you rightly said, pay for power. But we know that for in the interim, there will be need for some of them to pay for power as much as possible. But government, in terms of some of the other subsidies, if they're able to take care of, take away the petroleum subsidy, take away now that the FX subsidy has also been taken away, power subsidy, we're expecting if that is also taken away, there will also be enough on the table for the government to see how they can focus on the masses, those in the rural area. They can, in terms of the roads that they need, in terms of the power, they don't consume as much power as those in the cities. It may be easier to fund that, to partner with private investors and to see how they want to subsidize and allow for those in the cities pay for some of these services, and the return you are getting from that, you use that to subsidize those in the rural areas.
Okay, let's talk a bit about the budget this year, threatening no doubt. We've seen the government adjust to the reality of oil price dropping $25. But what problem? Because we see capex, capital expenditure, dropping. That's where government went to. I want you actually to perhaps explain or expatiate this further. What problem we have? Because some people will say Nigeria has a revenue problem. Some will say that we have a debt problem. What kind of problem do you think we have? I've spoken to many people. Some tell me we have a cost problem. Some tell me we have a revenue problem. Some also tell me we have a spending problem. That even with what we're getting right now, we can manage and be good if the government is spending well, if leakages are plugged, if a whole lot of things are done, if the cost of governance is low. So what problem do we really have? Cost, spending, revenue? What?
I think, first of all, we need to view, if we view Nigeria as an enterprise, and for a company, if we hold our businesses and you believe that, yes, the revenue challenge is there, once you see that you're unable to meet up with the revenue, what you also come to look down, you look downwards and you see that what can you do to your cost. But when you look at that cost, recurrent expenditure will continue to live in denial. The recurrent expenditure, it's significant. So you see just 5% of the population spending about 60 to 70% of the actual revenue as expenditure in form of recurrent expenditure. Then in that kind of economy, you can't expect a growth. So our major challenge is we need to be truthful to ourselves. We need to be able to see, yes, we may talk about unemployment, that I'm not saying government should sack, but if you face reality, how can you continue to carry that high cost when you know that you are unable to get the revenue, able to get that revenue? So in terms of revenue, it's really challenging, and it will be more challenging in 2020. We know where crude oil prices that we've always relied on is even below the new budget benchmark of $30 per barrel. So we need to focus on our costs. And government, in terms of beyond personnel costs, there are a lot of costs that can also be reduced. Yes, I may not sit down here and be able to identify some of those costs, but once you know that you cannot grow your top line, then you need to be sincere with yourself, face reality, and reduce your costs. But you would see when they were also reviewing the budget, it's more of cutting capital expenditure, which we believe that even implementing capital expenditure would have been a tall order for them with the revenue projection. So as much as possible, we have both the revenue challenge, we have both the the cost challenge. In terms of the debt, our debt sustainability, the challenge we've been having is most of the debt have been directed into recurrent expenditure. We feel that even if government decides that they want to fund some of these projects, they've tried this strategy of the Sukuk bond. We can see when people travel, they see this road has been funded by Sukuk. One, it fast tracks in terms of the building of those roads. Once contractors knows that the funds have been set aside with the custodian and will be released based on milestones. So if government wants to be sincere, they should raise more of those Sukuk bonds rather than raise the general FDM bonds that will be used to finance recurrent expenditure. Raise more Sukuk bonds, tie them to those projects. If actually it's compulsory that you fund this project. So contractors, most of these roads can be completed within a year once they know that funds are available. So you can, even if you don't want to call it Sukuk bond, there are project bonds that you can raise that will be tied to a particular project, and people will be able to track. So if we are able to change the mix of the utilization of our debt from more of recurrent expenditure to more of capital expenditure, then we'll begin to see some form of improvement in terms of in our economy.
Okay. Let's talk about, I know I really don't even want to imagine what it will look like at the central bank today and tomorrow. I guess they will be in their war room right now. The MPC two-day policy meeting starts today. We've not heard otherwise, so it will end tomorrow. We expect the decisions to come out tomorrow. What do you think would happen, apart from what the CBN has announced like last week? What else are we going to see? Are we expecting a reduction in interest rates? What are we expecting, like other banks central banks across the world are doing? The Fed, the BOE, the BOJ, all the central banks are in an overdrive mode right now. What's us and our MPC going to do tomorrow? Mr. Ebo, are you still there? Okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes, there's been a lot of policy that the government has put in place, the CBN has put in monetary policy committee meeting. But in terms of looking at the reference rate, which is the monetary policy rate, over time it's become very ineffective. And what we may see, yes, we won't be surprised to see a rate cut, but it's just a signaling effect to align with what other global central banks are also doing. But we've seen that CBN have continued to use other tools to control interest rates as much as possible. We see that in terms of the Nigerian Treasury bills market rate is almost at 5% and below. And so we feel that the CBN, the MPC will just review in terms of some of the immediate policy, the convergence of the exchange rates that happened last week. Also, in terms of the adjustment of the exchange rate to 380, they will also want to assess in terms of the impact. They will also try to review the loan-to-deposit ratio of the banks to see whether banks are improving in terms of their lending, though it's a difficult time to lend now in an era of uncertainty. But by and large, I feel that though we may see a rate cut, but not necessarily going to transmit into affecting interest rate environment, both the lending interest rate as well as interest rate on fixed income transactions.
All right, let's see how it goes. You raised a salient point too. If they reduce the interest rate, perhaps of what advantage will it have? Because we've not seen the markets reacting to that really like we see in other climes. If the Fed, of course, the Fed interest rate right now is near zero. BOE, RBA, and even the Reserve Bank of South Africa just dropped interest rate by 100 basis points. But let's see how that goes. Thank you very much, Mr. Ebo, for joining me today on the program.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah. And enjoy the rest of your day.
I will try. Let's try as much as possible to be safe. You know, it's not really a good time for the country right now. Let's all be safe and be sober and see how we all can bring out this country from this quagmire. Thank you very much, Ayodeji. He is the MD of AFRINVEST Securities. All right, just before we go, let's see if we can take a few comments on Twitter. Hilary in the Mele says, a national lockdown would really be injurious in a country like Nigeria, where the basic social safety nets are not in place. It would really have far-reaching socio-economic consequences on the overall. We are definitely not ready. Ata Joseph says, I could imagine the hunger and suffering this will bring to many Nigerians if there's a lockdown, when every necessary precautions needed to keep you in good shape, like hand sanitizers. Food prices are rising each second by the day. Thank you all for your tweets. But just before we go, take precautionary measures. Be the best you can be the change you want to see. Let's not also spread fake news. The real news is coming in from NCDC. Don't spread fake news. Don't say salt water. If you bathe with it, it will heal you or it will stop. Let's just stop panicking and let's stop being fearful. Let's have hope at this time. Diana Ross says, hope is an open window. So let's have hope at this point. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Bye now.